Hello everyone. I am going to be reading from My Naughty Little Sister, a Treasury Collection again by Dorothy Edwards, illustrated by Shirley Hughes. I wanted to show you the dedication page. Here it says, dedicated to naughty little sisters and their sisters everywhere. Very cute. You may not know I am a naughty little sister myself. And I wanted to show you the table of contents. Dorothy Edwards, I call them chapters, but they're really each just different stories that she would tell to her own kids and then realized kids everywhere would like them. And she has bundled 5 stories together, and they each have a little title. And we are about to begin the bundle of stories that is entitled My Naughty Little Sister Can Be a Good Girl Sometimes. My Naughty Little Sister and the Book Little Boy. Do you like having stories read to you? When I was a little girl, I used to like it very much. My sister liked it too, but she pretended that she didn't. When my sister and I were very little children, we had a kind aunt who used to come and read stories to us. She used to read all the stories that she'd had read to her when she was a little girl. I used to listen and say, "Go on," whenever my auntie stopped for a minute. But my little sister used to pretend that she wasn't listening. Wasn't she silly? She used to fidget with her old doll, Rosy Primrose, and pretend that she was playing babies with her. But really, she listened and listened too, and heard every word. Do you know how I knew that she listened and listened? I'll tell you. When my little sister was in bed at night, she used to tell the stories all over again to Rosy Primrose. One day, when my aunt came to read to us, she said, "I've got a book here that I won as a Sunday school prize. I used to like these stories when I was a child. I hope you will like them too." So our aunt read us a story about a poor little boy. It was a very sad story in the beginning because this poor boy was very ragged and hungry. It said that he had no breakfast and no dinner and no supper. But it was lovely at the end because a nice kind lady took him home with her and said she was his real mother and gave him lots of nice things to eat and lots of nice clothes to wear and a white pony. But the nothing to eat part was very sad. Now, do you know my little sister liked eating? And she was so surprised to hear about the book little boy with nothing to eat that she forgot to pretend that she wasn't listening. And she said, "No breakfast?" She said no breakfast in a very little voice. Our auntie said, No breakfast." My little sister said, "No dinner?" She said that in a little voice too, because she thought no dinner and no breakfast was terrible. My aunt said, "No dinner and no supper." And she was so pleased to think that my funny little sister had been listening that she said, "Would you like to see the picture?" And my little sister said, "Please." And I said, "Please," too. So our kind aunt showed us the picture in the book that went with the poor little boy story. It was a very miserable picture because the little boy was sitting all alone in the corner of a room looking very sad. There was an empty plate on the floor beside this poor little boy, and under the picture it said, "Nothing to eat." Wasn't that sad? My little sister thought it was very sad. She looked and looked at the picture, and she said, "No breakfast, no dinner, and no supper," like that, over and over again. My aunt said, "Cheer up. He had lots to eat when his kind rich mother took him home in the end. He had a pony too, remember?" my aunt said. But my sister said, "No picture dinner. Poor, poor boy," she said. Well now, when the reading time was over, my little sister was a very quiet child. She was very quiet when she had her supper. She sat by the fire, and my mother gave her a big piece of buttery bread and a big mug of warm sweet milk. But she was very quiet. She said, "Thank you," in a tiny, quiet voice, and she drank up her milk like a good child. When my mother came to say that the hot water bottle was in her bed, she said her prayers at once and went straight upstairs. My mother kissed my warm little sister and said, "Good night." But when my kind aunt kissed her and said good night to her, my little sister said, "No breakfast, no dinner." And my auntie said, "No supper." But my little sister smiled and said, "Yes, supper." My little sister looked very smiley and pleased with herself. When our aunt went to go home and looked for the Sunday school prize book, she knew why my little sister had said such a funny thing. Do you know what that silly child had done? She had put her piece of buttery bread inside the Sunday school prize book, on top of the little book boy's picture. She had given her supper to the book little boy. Of course, the book was very greasy and crummy after that, which was a pity because our aunt had kept it very tidy indeed, as it had been a prize. I suppose it was a very naughty thing to have done. But my little sister hadn't meant to be naughty. She thought that she had given the book little boy her own supper. And you know, she was quite a greedy child, so it was a kind thing to do, really. Now you know why she said, "No breakfast, no dinner, and yes, supper," don't you? One of the things I like about this story, this particular one, is that it shows that even though sometimes we all make the wrong choice with things, if you understand why somebody makes a choice, you can not be annoyed at them if they're making a kind of a bad choice. So I like that. That's kind of sweet. I also want to talk about how these stories were written 100 years ago, and so you might, some of the words or the way they talk might confuse you. It's also written, takes place in another country. It takes place in England. So I did want to just say that back then, lunch was actually called dinner, and dinner was called supper. So that's why they just didn't say lunch back then. So when they say dinner, that meant lunch. So I just thought I'd say that. There were a lot of great images that Dorothy Edwards created with her words. And I was kind of like, oh, I wish there was a picture, an illustration of what she wrote there, or I wish there was an illustration of this. And you know what I thought? You guys probably, there's something that you wish there was an illustration of, and you could do an illustration and you could send it to me, and I'll leave an email down below in the right below the video, and you can email me your picture, and if I get enough of them, maybe I can change this video and then reload it, and your illustration will be included with Shirley Hughes's illustrations, the original illustrations. An illustrator is somebody whose job it is to draw the pictures that go with text or go with the words in a story. And so sometimes it's fun to think of all the different jobs you can have in the arts, and that's one of them, is being an illustrator. So you can practice being an illustrator if you're inspired. I really liked, I was looking for the picture in the story that the aunt was reading of the sad little boy that says, I think it says nothing to eat or something like that. I wrote it down. Yeah, it says nothing to eat. And then, but they didn't have that illustration. And I also really like the idea of the pony, but they didn't have an illustration of that either. And I also thought I would like to do an illustration of her laying in bed with her little baby, her dolly, telling the story, retelling the stories to her as she was falling asleep. I liked those images in my head, and I thought, ooh, they would make really good illustrations. But they weren't in the book, because when you get a job to illustrate a book, they tell you how many illustrations, and then you stick with that because it's a lot of work. So you don't do extra usually, but I understand. And it's kind of nice to imagine it in your own head too. That's the cool thing when you have a lot of text and just a few pictures, is that you get to imagine it in your head, which gives you the opportunity to be the illustrator today. All right, I hope to see lots of illustration in my inbox. And don't forget to subscribe, click the thumbs up, and the bell.